Fall Out Boy is a one-of-a-kind band with a sound to match that statement. They've toured the world and played to packed arenas. They've received more acclaim than most of their contemporaries put together. And yet, none of that came for free. They had to overcome real obstacles, battling addiction, anxiety, depression, media pressure, and internal conflict to reach the top. Pete Wentz, the band's founder and lyricist, was at the center of it all. For years, he tried to fight fire with fire, countering criticism by creating his own rock star persona. But his famous marriage, drug abuse, and self-destructive behavior nearly destroyed the band. In fact, it nearly destroyed him too. So what kind of story are we dealing with here? The story of a band going down in flames? Or the story of a group of friends who triumphed even when everyone had written them off? Let's find out as we put Fall Out Boy under the microscope. In 2001, Pete Wentz was already a prominent figure on the Chicago hardcore and metalcore scene. He played in a myriad of bands, including Arma Angeles and Race Trader. But as those bands faltered, he decided to do something different. He decided to form a pop-punk project with guitarist Joe Troman. This project was intended to be an easygoing antidote to the more brutal scene they'd become used to. But magic was about to happen. Enter drummer Patrick Stump. Already playing in grindcore bands, Stump jumped at the chance to work with the then-scene celebrity Pete Wentz. But Stump could do more than just drum. He could sing too. And Troman convinced the starry-eyed youngster to fulfill this role at the band's first practice. So Stump became the singer and rhythm guitarist, while Ben Rose took over on drums. The first lineup of one of the most genre-defining bands of the 2000s was together, and big things were about to happen. Fall Out Boy, the band name taken from a classic episode of The Simpsons, was born. But beneath that rosy exterior, the seeds of conflict were being sown. Pete was a natural-born extrovert with charisma and looks to match. He became the figure at center stage, while Patrick Stump, the main composer for the band, took on a side role. Despite the tension, there was plenty to get excited about. Punk aggression, melodic sensitivity, smart lyrics. Even in 2001, these key features of the Fall Out Boy sound were all in place. But could Wentz share the spotlight with his fellow band members? Or would his megalomania swallow up the entire project? Ben Rose didn't last too long. The band drifted from one drummer to another, but they were at least recording music. When Fueled by Ramen heard one of Fall Out Boy's songs online, the label fell in love. They actually cold-called the band and signed them up. Shortly after, Fall Out Boy went into the studio to record their first album. Take This to Your Grave was released in 2003, after an arduous and intense recording session. According to band members, they didn't sleep anywhere they could shower while they were laying down the album. To make matters worse, sparks were flying between Wentz and Stump. Patrick had written the lyrics to FOB's debut 3-song EP, but now Pete had his own themes to explore. He wanted to be the band's key lyricist. It kind of worked out fine on the record. Stump wrote melodies and musical arrangements, while Wentz wrote some great lyrics. But it also made Wentz look like the group's leader. Patrick Stump might have been the frontman, but he was relegated to the status of side musician for the Pete Wentz Show. In those early years, Stump was pretty much okay with this. But how long would that last for? The year 2004 was a huge one for Fall Out Boy. The fraught relationship between Wentz and Stump was at least fruitful. The first record had been a big success too, with a legion of fans and a successful stint on the 2004 Warped Tour. They were ready for their sophomore album. This was the one that was going to change everything. Yes, Under the Cork Tree, recorded in late 2004 and released in May 2005, was the mainstream breakthrough the band was looking for. Pete's incisive, relatable lyrics, Patrick's impeccable compositions and melodies, it all came together in a perfect pop-punk storm. Songs like Sugar Were Going Down and Dance Dance became instant radio hits. The band was suddenly everywhere. By now, Pete's personality and looks were taking over the band's image. He was the face of emo, a teenage sensation, a heartthrob. Meanwhile, Patrick was working non-stop on the band's music. It makes sense that he felt a little overshadowed, left aside, underrated. The dynamic had worked for a while, but now it was getting uncomfortable. But Pete Wentz's star quality wasn't just putting the band at risk, it was putting himself at risk too. In the wake of From Under the Cork Tree, Pete became a supernova of attention, swallowing the Fall Out Boy universe entirely. He dominated interviews, even speaking on topics relating to the band without checking with the others first. and Patrick's feeling of alienation was getting worse. Critics were pretty cruel about the vocalist. They said he was just a mouthpiece for the artistry of Pete Wentz. This was supposed to be a creative partnership, but in the eyes of the public, it was anything but. This was certainly unfair on Stump, but the attention was taking its toll on Wentz too. With his emotions pushed to the breaking point, the poster boy for a generation of emo kids felt like he had nowhere to turn. He had an emotional breakdown. In February 2005, Pete Wentz swallowed a handful of Ativan pills in the parking lot of Chicago's Best Buy as an attempt to put an end to his anxiety, to silence the voice in his head. He had his stomach pumped and went to live with his parents back in Wilmette, Illinois. Pete Wentz had survived, miraculously. But what was going to happen to Fall Out Boy now? The band was now a juggernaut. It was unstoppable. Personal turmoil, near-death experiences, they couldn't get in the way of Fall Out Boy. 2006 saw Fall Out Boy playing in high-profile TV shows such as TRL, and connecting with a growing audience that helped them sell out arena shows for 10,000 people. They even got a Grammy nomination for Best New Artist. But while the band was enjoying a meteoric rise to fame fueled by outstanding songs, catchy melodies, and clever lyrics, Pete's mental health was still a serious concern. His behavior became erratic and would often lead to public scandals. He went from being the face of emo and the spokesman of a generation to a common target for tabloid gossip. When intimate photos of Wentz were leaked, these tabloids couldn't resist. Suddenly, he had everyone looking at his private parts. He was literally naked in front of the world. Pete Wentz had already attempted suicide, and the media pressure was forcing him back into a very dangerous position. Who could he rely on at this time? Tensions had become frayed, but could Fall Out Boy save their friend and keep the group together? Even while everything was falling apart around them, the show had to go on for Fall Out Boy. They went back to the studio to create the follow-up to their biggest, most successful album at the time. The result was Infinity on High, and it was a huge success. In just the first week, the album shifted 260,000 copies and went to number 1 in the Billboard 200. The record was loved by critics and fans alike, but it marked a shift. The band had moved away from the pop-punk of their early years, and were now creating more accessible pop tunes. But despite all the success, there were problems. Internal disagreements, arguments, and an unavoidable sense of disconnection between the composer and the lyricist became more difficult. Pete's high-profile relationship with singer and teen sensation Ashlee Simpson wasn't helpful for the band's intention to shift the focus away from the scandals to the music. The 4 kids from Illinois had set out to make great music and to tour the world, and they'd achieved both, but the realities of their fame were getting way, way out of hand. I threw something across the room over a major to minor progression. That was the statement Patrick gave the press about the sessions for the follow-up of their best-selling album. He called the sessions painful. He told Alternative Press, "I felt, man, this isn't my band anymore. It's no one's fault, and I don't want to make it seem that way. It was more of a complex I developed based on stuff I was reading. It's hard to hear. Joe and Andy are just along for the ride." The band were just about holding things together while their records were selling well and scoring rave reviews. But the release of 2008's Folie à Deux changed all that. The album didn't achieve the same critical acclaim as its predecessor, and didn't chart as highly either. Now the band's internal problems were in sharp focus. Some felt that the larger-than-life figure of Pete was harming their reputation. Patrick felt he was reaching the point of no return, the breaking point. Despite all his efforts to steer the musical wheel of the ship, the media's ever-critical eye was constantly on Pete and his public outbursts and controversies. How would they move forward? Or was everything about to fall apart? After an outstanding show at Madison Square Garden on October 4, 2009, Fall Out Boy went on indefinite hiatus. The members of the band took it hard. Drummer Andy Hurley told Rolling Stone that he went through the darkest depression ever felt. "I looked at my calendar and it was just empty." Patrick was in a bad place, physically exhausted, emotionally drained, and artistically spent. But it was Pete Wentz, who was abusing Xanax and Klonopin, who suffered the most. His high-profile marriage with Ashlee Simpson collapsed, and he withdrew almost completely from the public eye. He told Rolling Stone that he had basically gone from being the guy in Fall Out Boy to being the guy who, hangs out all day. The emptiness, the marriage failure, the addiction, the depression, and the lack of motivation to go on left him broken. He had to figure out how to move on with his life without the validation of fame. Patrick made a solo record, Soul Punk, which sold poorly. Pete started an electronic project and even formed a heavy metal band with Scott Ian and Rob Caggiano from Anthrax. But none of that could fill the hole Fall Out Boy had left behind. Pete and Patrick were not speaking to each other, and it seemed like the end of an era. Time really can be a healer. In 2012, 2 years after the breakup, Pete Wentz was best man at Patrick Stump's wedding. So they were friends again. But what about Fall Out Boy? Both Pete and Patrick had tried their best to explore other creative outlets, but Patrick's solo career was a flop and Pete's side projects sank immediately. And so the fans were still missing and wanting Fall Out Boy. The friends realized that together they were much more than they had ever imagined. Pete was pushing to grow up and be the responsible dad he needed to be. "There was a jump cut in my life," he said to Rolling Stone. Meanwhile, Stump didn't want to have the status of has-been at the early age of 27. It was Pete who made the phone call in 2012 and told Patrick, "I know what you need. You need your band." That was the first step toward rebuilding the project that had changed their lives so many years before. They got together for a writing session. Although the songs ended up being discarded, that set the ground for a second reunion. The second attempt gave them songs that both artists felt represented where they were at in their lives, a new version of FOB worth sharing. They needed each other. They wanted to make music again. The dream was real once more, and Fall Out Boy were going to do everything they could to make it a success. The band was together again, but the dynamics had changed. The creative balance was restructured, and the overall direction became more democratic than it ever was. "We didn't want to come back just to bask in the glory days and collect a few checks and pretend, and do our best 2003 impersonation," said Stump to MTV after the comeback was officially announced. The band also made an effort to balance out the public appearances. This meant giving Patrick, Joe, and Andy equal time in the limelight with Pete. And this wasn't the old Pete. It was a new version, a mature, calm, and positive Pete, ready to redeem himself in the public eye and conquer the charts with Fall Out Boy yet again. For the right reasons, not fueled by tabloid gossip or public outbursts. They went into the studio and recorded Save Rock and Roll in secret, away from the industry, the critics, and the journalists. When they were finally ready to release it, they denied claims this was a comeback, instead saying that the band never broke up. Released on February 4th, 2013, the record debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200. Rolling Stone called the record a rather stunning renaissance. Entertainment Weekly went even further, saying the record was a major accomplishment for a band whom many in the industry had dismissed as kings of a genre whose time had passed. The new dynamics proved to be exactly what Fall Out Boy needed to make a stellar comeback. Fall Out Boy not only pushed through with their 2013 opus, they released 3 successful records after that and continued to play live shows for huge crowds. Pete's journey from teenage sensation to self-destructive supernova of talent was a tale of resilience and a lesson about mental health. It is heartening to see he seems to have come out the other side. Indeed, Pete Wentz now uses FOB as a platform to openly discuss the struggles he went through, how he coped in difficult times, and how he became the fully functional, successful, happy person he's today. As for his tension with Patrick, the friends have resolved their differences and the band has turned into a cohesive unit, a team working for the same goal. They're all equal parts of the same puzzle, and work together to make the best music they can. The band's story is one of friendship and resilience against all odds. It shows how music can save lives, heal hearts, and bring people together. Now, more than 2 decades and 8 albums into their career, Fall Out Boy are in great form. They're still touring and killing it with their live shows, and they're slowly coming to terms with their status as scene stalwarts, at least to some extent. There is the elder statesman thing Patrick Stump told Kerrang! Magazine in 2024. But I think there's still this neat inability to be settled. I don't really have anything to prove, and I think on some level when we get on stage, we as a band are still earning it, and I feel like that's rad. That's exciting to me. After enduring so much and surviving to tell the tale, Fall Out Boy are one of the true success stories of pop-punk history. Here's to many more great years to come. Thanks once again for joining me on this video. I hope you enjoyed this examination of Fall Out Boy's glittering and sometimes troubled career. I've got another pop-punk deep dive coming up if you want to stick around. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know what you'd like to see me cover next in the comments below.